And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880. Pete Belcastro and Joe Brett, the real estate guys, with you today. And thanks for joining us here for our February the 2nd show. Joe, as we start another month, another activity, and lots of things happening around the real estate world as we explore those every week. Well, the folks sitting here between us.
Good show today.
It's going to be a very interesting show today. That's George Kramer here. George is a historic preservationist. Is that the right term to use for you?
Sure, that works.
You know, because we see you around lots of places whenever there's historic discussions, cities, governments, individuals,
it's a great
homeowners,
resource.
builders.
Yeah,
you got to call George, right?
Because a walking historical database.
He's the guy, you know. And so we thank you for being here. And historic preservation, you're busy all the time, aren't you?
I usually stay pretty busy, Pete, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
And next to us in the middle here is Stacey Boals, who's a real estate broker with Coldwell Banker, Pro West in Ashland. And Stacey, historic homes, you have a great passion for that, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
How did that start? What did that start with that?
You know, I really don't know. I think my husband's a retired contractor, and I just think I started looking at these homes and appreciating the work that had been into them, the craftsmanship and all of that, and it led to
kind of blossomed.
Yeah.
To where you are today. Well, tell me what the state is. Here's we're sitting here in 2019 now. You know, historic homes, historic buildings. You think, God, every one of them there can't be any more left. We've already preserved everything we have. Tell me what the status is in your opinions of historic buildings, historic homes in our area right now. Are we helping them, or what's going on with them?
Well, I think it's mixed. I think that there are a lot of great historic homes, historic structures that have been identified and saved, but we also have growth pressures in Southern Oregon. And a lot of times historic homes are in really lovely sites on desirable lots, and people want to do something else with them. Historic homes, for all of their charm, you know, they don't have a den, they only have a one-car garage or no garage. There are things that people moving into a home want that some historic homes can't accommodate. But they like the lot, they like the trees, whatever. And then on the other hand, you have people that absolutely love a historic home and are willing to adjust their expectations to get them. And it's just a question of balancing those two threads.
It does. It takes a special person. You know, it's not a new home. Older homes come with their warts, but you've got to have somebody who really has a passion for it. You know, there's things that you have to look out for. You know, you've got things that we don't have anymore, asbestos and we've got radon, but these type of things that were used in the construction of the home, and people have to realize it and can't be afraid of it. Yeah,
all the time out of there. Is the market for historic homes still good?
I've seen it increasing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I've seen it increasing. But like I said, it's a kind of a specialized market. It's got to be a niche market. Yeah, it's got to be the person who has a passion for it, knows that they're going to have some work to do. Maybe. I mean, some of them have been beautifully restored, yeah, and it's something you can talk about. You know, a new home, you have no story, really, if you think about it. The old homes, I spent today doing my homework because I knew somebody sitting next to me here has it all in his head. And the stories behind all these houses. Like I was reading the application for the Oakdale Historic Overlay that Vicki Bryden did, I guess. And the research she put into it was just unbelievable. The history and the names that I recognized that were the founding fathers of Medford, you know, and it was. I almost got wrapped up in that and not my work.
Are our communities doing a good job? And do you guys think in having historic neighborhood designations? They do all sorts of different things, don't they? Or are they doing enough to do that?
I think that's the best thing that they did. And like we were talking about, you know, people wanting to tear down houses and build something new, putting a historic overlay. Yes, it has limitations, but it also preserves, you know, what's there and the history of Medford.
Are people afraid of those kinds of things generally? I've had clients, and you look at, you say, well, this is in a historic district, or this is in a historic home or something, and some shy away from those things, but they don't really need to. They're not that restricted, are they?
They're usually, a lot of the restrictions are advisory, and as Stacey says, it's sort of part and parcel with living in a historic district. Everybody loves those restrictions when they're applied to their neighbor. Nobody likes them being applied to themselves.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
it's a balance. You have to walk in with your eyes open. I work in most of the communities in Southern Oregon, all over the state, and it does take a special kind of person. If you don't value that and you're not willing to take any trade-offs to live in that kind of a neighborhood, there's a whole lot of land in Oregon that doesn't have historic designation. Build there.
Yeah, you see, go over someplace else and build and leave those areas alone. So you're saying that the communities have done a good job then of preserving the neighborhood areas with their overlays and historic designations?
I think over time, Southern Oregon has done a good job of that. Where that falls down, Pete, is history sort of marches on. We 20, 30 years ago identified the Oakdales and the Minnesotas and the Geneva streets. The areas that didn't rise to the top then, that are now a century old and lovely, it's a little harder to get a new designation. I don't think a city in Southern Oregon has created a new historic district or a new historic overlay for 2 or 3 decades.
But
wasn't it early 90s that the downtown overlay was instilled, I think, but that's not residential.
No.
Yeah.
The Minnesota Geneva, that was where I did some pretty good research just recently. They had a neighborhood historic improvement district of which they were given a tax break over the course, I think, of 15 years or 9 years, and that in return they made improvements to the homes, and there were requirements to the keeping the historic character and nature of them. You would know more about that than I would.
I actually,
I was
probably there too.
I was encouraged to hear and to learn about that because that had gone back a few years. Many years.
That's pretty much correct, Joe. I actually was hired by the neighborhood and prepared that historic district.
Good source. Right next to me.
And the state of Oregon at that point had a 15-year special assessment benefit, and you would, in exchange for maintaining and preserving and upgrading your home, you were protected from property tax increases for 15 years. And the idea was that in a perfect world, I had a client in Talent that bought a little commercial building that essentially was condemned. The land was worth about $100,000 at that point. The improvement literally was worth $5,000. They put about $150,000 into it, and for 15 years paid taxes on a $5,000 building.
Sure.
And that's the time to do it.
Yeah.
That's the time to make your application is before you do the work
and
on
that
it.
is how that system was supposed to work, and
yeah.
it worked really well. All of the changes to Oregon's tax law with ballot measures 50 and 47 sort of undercut some of that. And we've not really come up with another solution. There's some things pending in the legislature. 36 other states in the nation have an investment tax credit. So if you spend $10,000 on the right roof, you or something more, historically appropriate, the state will give you a tax credit to protect that. And I think it's important. Communities do a good job. These are private properties. They're owned by private investment, but they're also community assets. Just like anything else that we all love as living in Ashland or living in Jacksonville or Medford or wherever. And so I think it's appropriate for the government to have some skin in the game to help people keep these things for us.
And the theory behind that was what you save on your taxes, you're going to put back into the house.
You're going to improve the house along the way. So people who people who are afraid of a historic home because they think it's going to be so many conditions on it really need to talk to.
There's kind of two different animals. There's the historic overlay, and then there's the National Historic Registry. And it's all how you communicate it to the people too. I sat on the Historic Commission and watched the process. If you want to change the color of the paint exterior of your house, you make application to the city. It comes to the Historic Commission, yay or nay. But interesting thing is, we had an interesting rectory that was moved. The third owner or something like that, they wanted to put gutters and downspouts on. Well, the state said no.
Really?
Because they said it wasn't indicative of the
Of the historic
era
nature
of the
of the
house.
time.
And our city liaison at the time wrote a wonderful letter that basically said, yeah, well, lead-based paint was also indicative of that era, and it held the houses up better, and we think that the gutters and downspouts will actually preserve the house.
Preserve the house better,
and
sure.
it worked.
So
Excellent,
you
yeah.
can do that.
sure.
And fencing, and it's when you start changing the exterior, right? The interiors you can change and do, right, on historic homes mostly?
In general.
In general.
In most of the Southern Oregon communities, certainly. I think the term you're looking for is what we call in the business character-defining features.
Character-defining
And
features,
so,
okay, sure.
What makes the house historic? We often talk about if the person that lived in that house 100 years ago came back and stood on the sidewalk, what they should say, wow, they've really taken nice care of
It
that.
still looks the same.
Look at the new gutters.
Uh-huh.
You don't want them to say, yeah, I don't recognize that as where I grew up or where my
Right.
father lived or whatever. So you want that sort of man on the street
Yeah,
integrity.
absolutely. Stacey, did you ever lose sales over people, buyers just walking away because of some of the
No.
things that they thought that they couldn't do or
Nope.
that they really?
No.
So what?
Like I
okay.
said, it's not a huge market,
Yeah.
but these people understand. And if you communicate it well, and it's really not that difficult.
No,
Yeah.
it
You know,
isn't.
it really isn't.
My response to that, I tend to be, I'm not in sales, I don't, but if you are scared, petrified about regulation from a historic house, don't buy one.
What
Uh-huh,
about,
yeah.
I mean, you've got CC&Rs in new neighborhoods.
Yeah.
They're
Right,
probably
yeah.
more restrictive
Yeah.
in some cases.
Probably are. Probably. I never thought of it that way. They
Mm-hmm.
probably are. When you think of covenants and CC&Rs, homeowners association, whatever there are, there's always that out there.
Architectural review, homeowners meetings, yes.
Yeah, I don't want to do any of that. Are there still applications being made? When was the last historic home in Medford or Southern Oregon that you can think of
Or district,
that was placed
yeah.
on the National Register of Historic Places? I'm trying to think. I was trying to go back, and I don't. You used to see these things. I mean, you would read about them,
Yeah.
and it seems like that is just kind of filtered away. Maybe there are none left, or are
No, there's lots of houses in Southern Oregon that have the quality and character and deserve to be on the National Register.
still today.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
It is a lot.
Stacey?
I have to say, it's a lot of work. I mean, only because you have to do research, and he can
Yeah.
get a little bit more into that. But research into the history of the home, whether it's a primary or
In a district,
In-
primary, secondary,
primary,
contributing.
secondary, as far as importance, and then also your plan on what you're going to do with the
Well,
house.
and I think, as Joe was saying, there used to be a financial incentive for people to
Right.
get on the National Register because they would take advantage of the tax
Right.
credit. I cannot tell you the last private home in Southern Oregon, it wasn't even really a private home. The last house that I put on the National Register was a house in Williams
really
that was
Wow,
owned by
okay.
a nonprofit, and they wanted to be able to market it as a historic home, and so it was a financial incentive for them.
Uh-huh.
Most of the National Register properties today are commercial properties
Okay.
because there's still a federal benefit that is quite substantial
But
for
that,
those
but that
people.
15-year of frozen tax, property tax frozen on historic homes is gone then.
Well, the 15 years been gone for a while. There
Okay.
is a 10-year benefit currently that they may or may not extend for another 3 years, but it's not as good of a benefit.
It's not as good as a benefit. See, I don't know why they would take that away. Why would you do something like that to try to preserve these homes? Instead, you penalize potential owners to preserve the homes or the buildings. That
Perhaps-
just doesn't make any sense to me. We got a break coming up here.
political
We got to come back and continue our conversation. We're with George Kramer and Stacey Boals today. When you come back, I want you guys to come back and think of some of the buildings we've lost around the valley here, and some of them might be in danger still around today that you think should be preserved too, and kind of what's going on there. Anyway, we're at Real Estate Show here on KCMX today. Don't forget you can check out any of our past shows at realestateshoworegon.com. We're coming right back after this. And welcome back to the Real Estate Show here on KCMX News Media 880. Pete and Joe, the real estate guys, with you today. Thanks for joining us here as winter moving along. The weather is supposed to, it's crazy. Super Bowl week. It's the end of our holiday season for Joe and I. We start back at Halloween. We go Halloween to the Super Bowl in our holiday season.
That's
and
the
it's
holidays.
ending.
It's too short. Too short. Otherwise,
It's done.
Thanksgiving to New Year's.
Yeah, where did it go? It's over. Anyway.
And I apologize to my neighbors when my Christmas lights out front are on Sunday. They come back on for the Super Bowl to signify the end of the holidays.
yeah.
So They're Christmas lights too, so it looks
It's
really.
a strange world we all live
Yeah,
in,
just
let me tell
stay
you.
away from Aspen Street on Sunday.
Today we're talking with George Kramer, who's well known around the state for historic preservation of buildings and knowledgeable guy, consultant extraordinary when it comes to historic properties. And Stacey Boals, who's a real estate broker with Coldwell Banker down in Ashland. You're past president of the
Rogue Valley Association of
Realtors.
Realtors and Southern Oregon Multiple Listing Service.
I knew that too.
Royalty.
We got it.
Royalty
we got it all
in the
here
house
today.
today.
And Stacey has a great passion for historic homes and knows them really left and right. They all have a history. They all have a story.
A story.
Isn't that the central thing to all these buildings? Right?
I had a client once who had a historic home. She decided to buy something new, and the more we talked about it, the more we realized that she had such a history of talking about the history of her old house. She had nothing to say about the new one, so she ended up buying another historic home.
You got to have a story. Commercial buildings too have stories, right?
They definitely all have stories, development histories, the businesses that were in them. I'm laughing. I'm thinking about the Jacksonville Presbyterian Church, which was a hugely controversial project, all brand new construction. And what we ended up doing for that design was we created a backstory. We tried to think of why would the church, had Jacksonville's history been different in 1910, they would have outgrown their historic church and they would have bought an old farm at the edge of town because land was cheap. And we designed this entire story and built that church as though it had been built as the congregation had grown over time. So it has additions, even though it was
cool.
and I think, you know, most people think that was pretty effective. So even when a building doesn't really have a story, you can create one and use it as a guide for development, and it somehow gives it that extra value.
But what a great historical flavor and story it can tell, you know, by its completion and its integration to the community.
I love Old East Medford. Some of the homes and neighborhoods there are just fabulous. Is that a historic
I'm an Oakdale
district
guy.
area?
I'm an Oakdale guy.
Is that in Medford? East Medford?
East Main Street isn't.
There is the Geneva,
Geneva,
Minnesota
yeah.
Historic
Geneva,
District.
But further
And then,
up, no.
and then
yeah.
across Main Street is Corning Court.
Okay,
And
you're
those-
right, Corning Court.
And
Right.
then there's the Oakdale Historic District in West Medford. But other than that, the only houses in Medford that are considered formally designated are just individual houses that somebody listed on the National Register.
And that's how that works. Is that area, there are many beautiful old homes in there.
Oh, definitely.
Absolutely.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh.
I love driving through there
Well,
in those areas. I mean,
I did a project for the city of Medford probably 7-8 years ago now, the West Medford study. We looked at, I think, 1,200 properties basically from Oakdale west to, I think, Columbus or beyond, and identified historic resources and houses that are wonderful. And it could be another historic district. But there's never been enough public support or community
For
interest to
those.
actually go forward and do that.
I mean, there's those beautiful homes, of course, in Ashland, you know, that are all there in the
Yeah.
downtown. Grants Pass has
Jacksonville.
really some beautiful
Yeah.
neighborhoods
Yeah,
also.
none of which are designated.
Nothing in Grants Pass
Really?
is
The
really
downtown, the
da-
historic district.
Just the downtown
and,
historic
and then
district.
scattered individual houses.
Yeah.
But you know what you asked earlier, Pete, that community's doing a good job. 25 years ago, the cities of Medford or Jacksonville or Ashland would go out and fund and designate a whole area.
Okay.
100, 200, 500 properties. And then everybody within those new historic districts would have access to these benefits. What we do by the city sort of bowing out of that, because for whatever reason, it's up to the individual to do
Wow,
it.
right.
And so
I
just
didn't rea-
less people
I
do
didn't-
it.
I didn't realize, I
Right,
guess,
I didn't
from
either.
listening to you both, how much the role government played prior, and that has kind of gone away, and so the incentives to preserve some of these homes or buildings is not quite what it used to be, and that's a shame.
I think just now pride of ownership is what
Okay.
really needs to be stressed.
Right.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
What we got to admit, what buildings have we lost? Because we have 40% of sales in our valley are new people moving here, and they don't know anything about beyond, where we are.
What was
What
the
are
old
some of the
car
buildings?
dealership down on Main Street in the early 90s that we went ahead and approved to be demolished?
Crater Lake Ford or the
Crater-
wine
the old-
trout
original
yeah, the
building.
wine
Kramer
trout
wine
building.
trout
Right.
building.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
heart-wrenching
Yeah.
saying yes
Yeah.
to that. you know?
And like so many buildings, especially commercial buildings, that building had sort of fallen on hard times and people hadn't
Okay.
invested in it. And so it's really easy to, without doing that background, to look at it and not appreciate its story and what it could be. And so I always say that buildings have to go through this sort of difficult period of being old before they can become historic. The classic, I can't believe we tore that building down
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
in Southern Oregon is the old Ashland Hotel, which is where First Interstate
That
Bank
was
or
where the
Wells
first,
Fargo
fir-
is.
right,
Yeah.
right there.
And you probably remember that.
Oh,
I
no,
never
no,
saw
I
it.
don't remember that one. I was not that old. But the building that I can remember that I always loved in Medford was the old Medco headquarters
Yes.
building.
Which
Yes.
is now out in Sam's Valley.
Right.
Yeah.
What, they took
Right.
it out
He
somewhere?
took it
Yeah.
apart,
Yeah.
he numbered
Yeah.
all the pieces, and he took it out to his place in
Yeah.
Sam Valley and has put it all back together again, to a point. I mean, he's
Re-
still finishing
really?
the inside, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well,
Really? Okay.
And we've lost. There was a great house in Medford called the Vaughter House, which was is long gone. Big colonnaded front on it, and it got moved twice and then got torn down and is a parking lot. There was a little house in Phoenix that was one of the oldest houses in the city of Phoenix that got torn down because somebody wanted to build a place to park their RV.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And
Well, we need more people who will go to the extent of moving a house, too. On Oakdale, where I call it the rectory, where the
Okay.
rectory is, that house had burnt down, and they moved
Okay.
from the Catholic Church,
Right.
the rectory down, and put that in as a residence.
Right.
Right behind there, on the corner of 11th and Oakdale, was Dr. Bonacore's house. There's pictures of him sitting in the back patio looking out, and you can see the rectory. It's really strange because
Yeah.
it's not there.
Yeah.
But the Bonacore house originally was, I think, where our city hall is, and they moved it when the city bought the property, and they moved it to the corner of Oakdale and 11th.
Interesting.
Actually split it in two and added another section in between.
Oh, wow.
Didn't
Well,
know
while you're
that
at it,
either.
right?
They wanted a big house.
Well, and that was common. Moving houses was common.
Was common then, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the preserving of the Holly Theater. I mean, I'm so glad that has happened because the same way with the Criterion
Yeah.
Theater.
Yeah,
And
great
I was just,
assets,
And I
yeah.
was just over in Klamath Falls with the Ross Raglan the other day. It was the
Yes,
Esquire
great
Theater. And I was
example,
I remember 30 years ago when they saved that building.
Yeah.
So so the Holly is just like this. To me, it's like a crown jewel
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
beautiful again, right?
Some of
Well,
us are
and-
old enough to remember going to movies there.
I remember.
I
going
remember.
I was actually in the Holly just before I came here
Okay.
because that construction is underway.
Yeah.
And that is a classic example of a building that, a certain segment of society thought it can't be saved, it's too far gone, whatever. Somebody with vision stepped up, and when we always say in preservation, if you succeed in a preservation project, there is never any retroactive regret. Nobody says, "Oh, why did you save that
Yeah,
building?"
right.
Once you
point,
do
yeah.
it, they might think you're crazy for doing it,
Yeah.
but they're thrilled and thankful when you're done.
Yeah. So are there other buildings that are downtown Medford or Grants Pass that need that kind of love again, attention, or
Oh,
are
of
we at the
course.
end of them?
No.
The Elks,
The
great
Elks,
example.
The Elks.
is-
The Elks building,
Yeah,
okay.
the Elks is a
And-
classic example.
yeah.
And I think there are many other buildings in downtown Medford, and especially in downtown Klamath Falls, some in Grants Pass, where it just takes that right person with the right interest and willingness and capital to step up.
And
And
unfortunately, Klamath Falls, during the earthquake, had a lot of damage to some
Yeah.
of those
Yes,
older
they
brick,
did, yep.
brick buildings.
Yeah, they did. And,
And
yeah.
the neat thing about historic preservation, I used to be the design consultant for the Urban Renewal District in Medford. And part of the idea behind that was that if the city invested a little bit of money and matched it with some owner investment, we could
Right.
take one of these old buildings and turn it around. And then your neighbor would kind of go, wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I wonder what my building would
Right,
look
yeah,
like.
right.
And it sort of builds upon itself.
It absolutely does.
But it's a good thing.
Yeah, there's a name, very famous name, in
Frank Clark.
in Jackson County, Frank C. Clark.
Frank C.
Yes.
Clark. I knew immediately who.
I was talking with an architect friend actually over in Klamath, and I brought the name Frank Clark up, and she said, "I've never heard of it." She's new here, She said, I'm going to go look him up. She says, what an amazing story. But he
Amazing.
was a guy, Frank Clark, a Frank Clark home or a Frank Clark design building is really the top of the line,
And it
right
wasn't,
here?
it's the construction too. I used to look at, no matter how decrepit somebody had let a house go, if it was a Frank Clark, it had good bones.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was worth saving.
How many Frank Clark homes were actually in Medford today?
my
Do you know
gosh.
how many are still
I
surviving?
had pages and pages when I was looking them up this morning.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
He practiced in Southern Oregon from like 1904 to his death in 1950.
1957.
Right.
I was born in 58, so it's 57.
And,
Okay.
and partly that's why he's so well known. He was just here for a long time. He had an incredible client base because
Yeah.
if you had capacity,
Oh.
you hired Frank Clark.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I there's got to be 150, 200
Wow.
still standing.
There's that
What a
many.
legacy.
Oh, I didn't
Oh,
realize
yeah.
there was that many.
And I'm
of them.
just talking houses, Pete.
Just
Yeah.
I mean,
houses.
the commercial buildings that he designed, he designed that wonderful building for Harry and David. He designed
Okay.
the
Hillcrest
Sparta
Orchards.
building.
The house and the barns.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
parts of the barns, yeah.
I didn't. Okay.
And so he had everybody who was anybody in Southern Oregon hired Frank Clark.
Frank Clark was
because,
that
and he
guy.
was here for so long.
Well, I had during the Elks building sale, there was a huge in the closet all the original blueprints of
Oh,
that
wow.
building,
Yeah.
and they were on blue paper,
Yep.
blueprinted. And these architects, current guys, were looking at this and were saying we're paid. They were going, that's. Nobody could do that today because this was all done by hand
Right.
from the Frank
Yep.
Clark
Yeah.
company there, all hand drawn.
I have the
He said nobody
plans
could do
from the
that
old
today.
Bonacori house,
You
and I
do?
just treasure them.
Yeah, yeah. So are all the Frank Clark homes recognized or designated out somewhere, or
Some are iffy.
There are
it's just really, yeah.
there is an inventory of Frank Clark properties, which is as accurate as it could be at the time. A lot of the things that are in it aren't Frank Clark, and then I would imagine that there has got to be 30 or 40 properties on the National Register that he designed, at least.
Yeah, at least that. It's a
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
It's a fascinating story about him and his impact on architecture, obviously in Medford, and really the region, because he's down in Ashland too. There were
Ashland,
Frank
out on
Clark.
Old Stage Road, in Grants Pass.
In Grants Pass, yeah.
they're
all over.
everywhere.
And then
Yeah.
he hired a young creative guy named Robert Keeney. And Keeney designed the Rogue Theater, the Varsity Theater.
Okay.
He kind of did Art Deco kind of stuff.
So they
And
even did those buildings as well. See,
Yeah.
look what you
Everything
learned.
from,
Legacy.
from
Yeah.
craftsman to kind of Spanish style, just a
So
lot of different
We got to
types.
do a show just a show on Frank Clark homes and buildings.
Yeah.
He was,
Yeah,
he was
you really
versatile.
Fascinating individual as well. Well, speaking of fascinating, George Kramer and Stacey Boals are having an interesting conversation today with some fascinating people who love historic buildings and historic homes. We got a break coming up here on the Real Estate Show. We're coming right back right after this. And welcome back to the Real Estate Show here on KCMX News Media 880. Pete Belcaster and Joe Brett, the real estate guys, with you today, along with George Kramer and Stacey Boals here in the house talking historic preservation around Southern Oregon. Next week, Jim Remley will be along. He's the managing principal broker at John L. Scott. We'll have a Market Watch show for you and we'll get you updated on the latest SOMLS stats, which, Stacey, ought to be pretty interesting every month. We look forward. Stats
We're
never,
gonna-
Some of us that they find it interesting, yes.
stats never lie. Is
Pete,
what
Pete and I
get.
look forward to grilling Jim Remley when he gets in here. So he comes about twice a year, so we get him.
Yeah.
We get him for that hour, and we work him over.
Oh, today on the show, we've been talking about historic preservation, historic buildings in Southern Oregon. We learned a lot. I guess suppose that the hardest thing for me to hear is that the governments have kind of lessened their interest in helping preserve some of these buildings with no incentives and things like that. That's stupid. We give incentives to everything. I was at the So Ready thing. They give incentives to businesses like crazy to come here, but when it comes to this, we don't do it anymore, which is really a shame. And I'm sorry to hear that. But anyway, we march on. And you two are pretty optimistic about all this. I mean, you see a lot of good things.
I do see a lot of good things, and actually, in terms of incentives, the state, the legislature will be considering this year a new incentive for historic homes,
Really?
and houses,
Okay.
buildings. 36 other states in the country have, instead of using a property tax-based incentive, they use an income tax-based assessment benefit. And there's been a movement in the preservation community to try get Oregon to be the 37th state. and we have some legislative interest, and they're actually going to discuss it. And so maybe
And what would that do?
that would mean that you would apply to the state for a matching grant,
Okay.
minimum of $10,000. And if you were awarded a grant, the state would essentially give you money to take care of your home, and then on the back channel would sell it as a tax credit to an investor. So it doesn't, the credit is paid for, and that's pretty much how it works in all these other
Oh,
states.
okay,
And so you,
okay.
a lot of times you'll have somebody that with a historic home that maybe isn't one of the visionary people Stacey and I have been talking about. And they're
yeah.
like, well, you want me to put a nice roof on it. I can put a metal roof on it. It's going to cost me $10,000 more to put a nice roof on it. The state will help you out.
Okay, all right.
So that there's not a blue metal roof in the middle of a historic
yeah,
district.
yeah.
And I think we're seeing younger and younger purchasers on these homes. And sometimes it's a little tough. They're stretching the penny a little bit. And I think something like this will really, really help them step forward, because a lot of these homes need younger people in them.
Yeah.
Right, good point.
And on that same level with younger people, in a lot of communities, historic existing houses are affordable.
Sure.
And so, my wife and I, when we were in our 20s, bought a 1910 bungalow because that was what we could afford. And if a program like this had been available, we wouldn't have had to, eat beans and top ramen for a year to pay for the new roof. And so, especially in the larger cities, Portland and Eugene, where affordable housing is this huge crunch, and people are coming in and tearing down old houses to build something new because that's the land they can buy. This would be one more tool to assist people to keep those houses and keep them in an affordable range.
Because when they tear down those old houses and build the new ones, they have priced out the first-time home buyers right out of the
Exactly.
game.
Well,
There's
they don't
no
realize,
chance.
we were talking before the show that people think, I'd tear it down, build something new, and I can do it just as cheaply. Well,
Right.
not with new building codes and everything.
yeah.
True, very
the old
true.
ones didn't necessarily have to have engineered foundations.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I talk to with a potential buyer. These don't have engineered foundations. There are some products that could be health detrimental. But these are the things you have to look for.
Yeah.
And we have forms that basically are checklists for potential buyers to look at that we make part of the contract. This is what to look for. Here's some other things that you might want to think about, and one is the historic benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, it's a special person. If you communicate it properly and make sure that you hold their hand through the whole thing, it's not scary.
Yeah, and some of the homes that we see, historic homes, are updated inside,
Right.
Yeah.
and some aren't, right? I mean,
Right.
some are still using
Right.
original infrastructure units, I suppose, like heating things,
Like
and
boilers.
stuff like that, boilers and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and others
And the
aren't, right?
beautiful radiators against the
Yeah,
walls
yeah,
that I
yeah.
just
Lovely.
love.
Yeah, it's amazing when you do
And,
walk
and,
around.
and there are ways to mitigate any of those potential health hazards or threats that come with properties. We're
Yeah.
very good at that
Yeah.
these days, of finding ways to neutralize that.
And sometimes I think people just don't talk out loud what they're saying. I had a federal client one time, a federal agency, they should know better, who told me that they couldn't save a building because it was filled with hazardous material and they had to tear it down. And I said, you do realize that if you tear it down, you have to abate all the hazardous
Exactly.
material
You're-
anyway.
Out of there,
And,
yeah,
they- and,
yeah.
and, you know, and people will tell me, well, we can't save this house. It needs a new roof. It needs all the new electrical. It needs all new plumbing. And it's like, and if you build a new house, it's going to need a new roof.
Yeah.
You know?
You're going to have to put a
All
new
of
roof
the
and new
above.
plumbing and new foundation and new everything in there, not
so-
just.
Yeah.
I always wonder, after the house is gone,
Yeah.
you can't go, oh, that was a mistake.
That was bad, wasn't it? There, we're going to run out of time. But the Holly Theater, finish that.
Yeah.
Is it gonna open here soon? Or tell me update us there.
The Holly Theater is under construction. It's a phased construction. They are looking at having the first show sometime in early 2020.
2020. So,
So
geez, this is
this year-
2019
this-
already.
this-
so
Who's,
it's coming
who's
up.
the
year-
opening act? Do we know?
No, and that's
yeah.
not I don't count any
Come
connection to
on,
that.
You're not the talent?
But I can tell you that all of the interiors in the process of being disassembled. We have all of the ideas, most of the ideas for what it's going to look like when it's done.
Wow.
And if you've not been in the portions that have been restored, it's going to be absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait for that. Hey, another building I thought of that shouldn't have been torn down maybe was the old Forest Service stuff over on off of what was that on East McAndrews,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah.
shouldn't have been. That,
No,
that should
no.
still be there. And what about old Sacred Heart Hospital? I wish that would have stayed. I remember
you
that.
go.
big
Up on the hill where
Yeah.
Medford Heights is now.
What an imposing building. It would
I
have been
spent one of my
beautiful today.
sickest
So-
nights as a 13-year-old up
But
there.
there are still like 3 historic homes up there,
Yeah.
including a couple Frank Clark's.
And there's a Forest Service warehouse in Grants Pass.
Yeah,
That there were 7 buildings, and 4 of them will be retained and restored.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So there is, you make a little bit of progress, and then it slides back, and you keep at it. That's the best part of this whole thing, isn't it? You just never give up. There's enough out there.
It's encouraging how many people have an appreciation, though, homeowners that take on those homes and have that appreciation to continue the legacy,
Thank goodness
that
they
our
do.
history,
Yeah.
and the meaningfulness of that
Yeah.
history
Thank
to
goodness
our,
they do.
yeah.
That people do.
our
care.
neighborhoods
just
and
right?
our
makes
towns
me
and
happy.
regions.
Because you like that. I know you
I
really,
love it.
you really,
Yeah,
you really
yeah.
want to see that
I
happen.
want to see people take, it's something that, I've got one now that's pretty much, I wouldn't want to say original, but it hasn't been updated in quite a while. And again, a young couple buying it, and they've got all these plans, and I
Yeah.
can't wait to see it.
That's really
But
the
this
key,
house
yeah.
still has things like the original door hardware, the original hardwood floors, that type of thing. Those things are what they're looking for. You can put a new kitchen in, you can do all that, but you can't replace a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
If I ever buy a historic home, please don't hold against me if I work with Stacey instead of you.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, Michael.
If you work with new construction,
You have to get used to
And-
basements and attics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
If
there's
you-
potential in both. Yeah, there
Yeah,
are.
there is.
Yeah.
Well, you should. No, I don't think you would. You
No,
would not get that.
no, I'm not the
But
head.
I still love the old East Medford neighborhoods.
Yep. Yeah.
Those are my favorite. When I was a
Yeah.
little kid, even those were just fun to drive through. I remember when you come over to see those historic homes. They were historic homes even then to me. And
Well,
how
and there's some
lovely
little
of them
nuances
are.
in there in Ridgeway and some little
Yeah.
hills that meander up and down some really neat
And
little
they draw
gems.
good
tucked
prices,
o-
Talking
you know.
about
neat
West
little gems
Medford
in there.
earlier, I had a little extra time, and so I started driving around Park Street and back in there. I hadn't
Yeah,
been through that area in a
yes,
long
yeah.
time. Really surprised how many of those cute little cottages are being fixed up.
They are. Yeah, I
They
drive
are
through there all
really-
the time. It's neat
yeah.
to see.
So that's good to see. Well, we're out of time, so we have to go. So it's nice to visit with
Great
you, George
show.
Kramer.
Thank
And look,
you.
you can Google George Kramer. You can find him, and Stacey Boals as well. She's at Coldwell Banker, and they can answer questions if you have obviously more about historic homes because they're experts. And I love
Yep.
talking with you. We could talk about
Good
this for a
stuff.
long time.
Yeah.
And it's good to hear some good news out of this. That stuff is happening, and we wish everybody well with that. So thank you all for coming with us. That'll do it
Thank
for the
you.
Real Estate Show here on February 2nd. For Joe Brett, I'm Pete Belcastro. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week, and God bless you all.